Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for being on the show, One Universe. And for the benefit of our listeners, please introduce yourself.
Good morning. I am Dr. Amaia Iratzoqui. I am an associate professor at the University of Memphis in the Department of Criminology and Criminal Justice. And I'm also the research director for the Public Safety Institute, also known as PSI.
Very nice. So, please tell us about your personal life and you as an individual.
Okay. Well, I grew up in Miami, Florida. I am a daughter of an immigrant from the Basque Country. My father came to the United States in 1974. I was born and raised in Miami, Florida, after he began his work in the criminal justice system, and that is where I grew up. I did my undergraduate in criminal justice from Florida International University. I also did my master's in public administration from the same institution. And then I went to Florida State University and did my PhD in criminology and criminal justice from that program, which is currently, I believe, the most productive program in the country when it comes to criminology. So I have quite a bit of research background. But before I went into academia, I also worked in the criminal justice system. In Miami-Dade County, I worked in their Juvenile Assessment Center, also known as the JAC. The Miami model is one of the standard models for juvenile assessment centers across the country.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked in a gender-specific rehabilitation program in that facility. I also worked in what's known as the State Attorney's Office in Miami-Dade County, which is comparable to our District Attorney's Office here.
Mm-hmm.
The 11th Judicial Circuit is the 4th largest in the country, so Miami-Dade County sees quite a few cases. And I worked at that time developing crime scene photos and helping prosecutors and defense attorneys prepare their evidence for the cases being brought to trial or for being decisions being made in terms of plea agreements. So kind of having that educational background and that practitioner background has kind of led me to where I am today. I was asked to come to the University of Memphis in 2015 because of my expertise in domestic and intimate partner violence.
Mm-hmm.
The work that I do primarily focuses on the impact victimization has and its role in either leaving folks at future risk for harm,
Mm-hmm.
but also for being involved themselves within the criminal justice system, but its specific impact for women of color, and for our most vulnerable populations.
Okay. And since 2015, I know that you have done quite a few projects.
Mm-hmm.
What are the current projects that you're working on for the community?
Sure. So in my role as the research director for the Public Safety Institute, I have a unique opportunity as an academic to be much more involved in the community setting. Oftentimes academics are very removed from the community, but what I like to say about Memphis as a whole, and U of M specifically, is that our motto of driven by doing and engaged scholarship is not simply words. Most of us who are involved in research that impacts the communities that we serve are actually involved with the communities that we serve.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I came here, the work that I do related to domestic violence was something that immediately led me to become involved with the Family Safety Center, of course, which is the primary domestic violence resource center here, but also with related organizations, the Shelby County Crime Victims and Rape Crisis Center, Agape, Casa Luz, which is the only Hispanic serving
Mm-hmm.
organization, as well as the YWCA, Love Doesn't Hurt, the Kindred Place, or what was previously known as the Exchange Club, and then the larger criminal justice community. I work with the Memphis Police Department most prominently, Shelby County Sheriff, Bartlett Police, as well as more recently with the District Attorney's Office and with the Office for Reentry, as we have a number of projects there. As I transitioned to the research director role in 2022, I was able to really get more involved in working with these partners on their specific needs. And so as an academic, I've been able to kind of bring a lot of these practitioners into my classroom and help them out with any research projects they have. But in my research director role, I've been able to kind of bring that to actual work that benefits these organizations. And so probably the most prominent one that I'm currently involved with is a 3-year, $374,000 funded project from the Tennessee Office of Criminal Justice Programs.
Mm-hmm.
And they gave the Public Safety Institute a grant to be able to pull together a coordinated community response towards domestic violence. And what that looks like right now is pulling together a domestic violence task force, which you're a part of, centered around a steering committee, service providers and practitioners in the community that look to work together to not only pool their resources and enhance their partnerships, but be able to then turn around and provide a continuum of care for our domestic violence victims and their families, which can in many cases include young children, pets, and relatives. And so that grant and that project are the primary focus of my attention right now, although the Public Safety Institute has a number of other related projects that bring in relationships with the Memphis Police Department, the Sheriff's Office, as well as related social service organizations. And then also now we work with the District Attorney's Office, Juvenile Court, and Memphis Shelby County Schools as well.
Okay. So coming to Memphis, Memphis is very unique.
It is.
It is on the top list of many things, and most of the things are bad, like crime, and that is what you deal with. I am also a part of an organization that formed a non-profit called as a Memphis Area Coalition on Hunger. And for me, it was shocking to know that Memphis is the hunger capital of the U.S. The problems with any city, maybe Detroit or Memphis or Chicago or any other city, is that there are many, many good things, and the bad things unfortunately just overshadow these good things that are done in the community. So what is your take, not just on the good things, we'll talk about the good things too, but about the bad things that have happened in the past, and what Memphis has recognized for the bad things that everybody talks about?
Sure. Well, I always like to tell my students I'm from Miami, Florida, and so Miami tends to rank pretty highly in terms of crime across the country. We're certainly known for our drugs and our gangs, just as much as we're known for the beautiful things like the beaches and the lovely weather and so on. And so coming from a high crime city to another high crime city was something where, you know, I was certainly not necessarily thinking about it from the context of moving from one danger zone to another. Really, any major city is going to deal with crime. But Memphis's unique structure is that because we have such a history of deprivation and segregation that are tied together to form, you know, this structural disadvantage that impacts many of our citizens of color, primarily our Black folks, our men and women who have kind of grown up through this time period where we're seeing how the impacts of things like lack of access to education, lack of access to quality housing, or quality housing that doesn't leave them exposed to dangerous toxins, is really kind of coming home to roost decades later. I mean, the problems are not new. The problems are certainly not going to disappear unless we learn from the history that has informed where we are today. So the concern for Memphis is, while we have so much promise, and certainly we have a lot of individuals individually and as organizations whose hearts are in the right place, they're committed, they have the time, the energy, and also the funding to be able to do these projects, we need to come together as a community to actually make that happen. And that's where I think Memphis is kind of at a crossroads. We have the drive and we have the identified needs. We have the directions we need to go. Now we need to actually just make it happen. Okay,
so you already went into the good part of it. But I still want to ask you, what are the other goods that you see in Memphis that are not related to what you do?
Well, coming here from Miami, Florida was a lot of transition. So I come from a county where, if you know anything about Miami-Dade County, we have roughly 80% of individuals who identify as Spanish-speaking, may or may not be Hispanic. I myself am conversational in Spanish. My father is fluent in Spanish, having grown up in Western Europe. And the impact of language and culture has very much informed my understanding of not just crime, but how culture can be intersectional and can be multicultural. And when I came to Memphis, it's very much multicultural, but in a very different way
Mm-hmm.
than Miami.
Mm-hmm.
And so one thing I really appreciated, not just coming to the South, but experiencing a multicultural environment in a whole new context,
Mm-hmm.
was, it was not so much a transition as it was kind of a welcoming. Miami and South Florida in general are a wonderful place to live, but I have never found as friendly folks as I did here.
Very nice.
I love Memphis very much, and after 8 years, I hope I can call myself a Memphian at this point.
Yes, of course you can.
So I am very much a Memphian, and I very much appreciate all the good that our city has to offer, because I've been elsewhere, and I think a lot of times when people focus on the bad things about Memphis, not because of their need to work to change it, but to only highlight the negative, kind of underscores the reality that a lot of other cities have problems going on too. We just don't emphasize their negativity as much as we do their positivity. So maybe Memphis can shift gears in focusing on the positive.
So as an analogy, I also work with the U.S. Department of Commerce in Washington, D.C. With an sub institution within the Department of Commerce called as Society of International Visitors. I'm saying it, but it has to do with international visitors being brought into the U.S. About 6 to 8 cities, and sometimes they also come to Memphis. So I'm part of the group that takes them to different parts, businesses, and other things that are associated with their backgrounds. When we take them to both the mayors, the city and county mayors, the Chamber of Commerce, we hear phenomenally good things. And my question is that what we have had in the past, as Memphis, as a city, as a business, we have FedEx, International Paper, AutoZone, and there are many beautiful things that are coming in the future as well. All the good things don't seem to trickle down to the benefit of the common man. So we have such a good, phenomenally good base, the best philanthropic city in the entire US, and also the worst things, crime, and so many other things. Why aren't they coming together to balance things that make Memphis a better place? We have major companies coming here because the city and county offer something really good. They offer them tax benefits and all of that, and they spend millions of dollars making big factories over here, and then they leave, because of lack of good skilled workers and all of that. But what is your take? How can we bridge that gap?
Well, I think having companies come here is a great start, certainly.
That's my pet peeve. Yep.
Memphis is a great city to live. But at the end of the day, having the businesses come here does not solve the problem. We need access to quality education, and we need the resources to make quality education available and accessible for everyone. Of course, as an educator, my primary thing is going to be education, but I'm talking from a K through 12 level. When you have underfunded schools, you have teachers who don't stay. Maybe they go to a D school for something from Teaching for America, and they do a year or two, and they leave because teachers have low salaries. They have no updated textbooks. They have no updated resources. They're not able to really utilize their teaching skills to educate our youth. And that has long-lasting ramifications. Our students don't have teachers who are invested in them because what they see is that the teachers leave. So the message that they get is, well, then why should I stick around? Why should I be here? And even if they do go through the school system, if they don't have a teacher who's been there with them through the entire program, who's going to write them letters of recommendation for college? Who's going to be able to help serve as a reference, a character reference for employment? All of those things have long-lasting impacts on the ability of our students to utilize their own skills to be able to get the jobs that are being brought in. And they're not earning the skills because they're not able to get in the front door. If they don't have the tools in their toolkit, they aren't able to become what they can be. And so I really do feel like education is one of the primary answers here. A lot of my students are native students. University of Memphis is primarily a commuter school. And so we have students who, for the most part, grew up in the Memphis and Shelby County school system. And they can attest firsthand all the things that they didn't have in that format. And as an educator, it's my job to provide a resource as much as possible. And in many cases, the simplest way I can be a resource is to write letters of recommendation for my students, to be able to bring practitioners into my classroom and connect my students to internships and jobs after graduation. But those are the students who are making it to college, and that's not a majority of the Memphis and Shelby County population. So really, to be able to look at education links ultimately back to poverty and back to segregation and back to deprivation and lack of access to just the foundational necessities that a population needs in order to thrive. And so you can bring in businesses, and you can even bring in quality educators, and you can bring in all of good things, but if the foundational things are not there, then you're not really addressing the root problem. And our city has so much potential, and we're looking to respond, but in many ways we need to look backwards and be proactive for our next generation, for our youth, because really they are not just the future, but they are the future for their own children and the generations after them as well.
Right. And what you're dealing with has to do with crime. So let us talk about the projects in depth for what you're doing.
Okay. So as I mentioned, the Domestic Violence Task Force that I work with primarily is centered on the providers. So that's practitioners themselves, service providers, folks working in the system. It is not as much focused on the clientele and the populations that they serve. So other projects that we have currently and that are proposed are more directly impactful. So for example, Bill Gibbons, who's the executive director of the Public Safety Institute, is working closely with our research assistant Max Helms and with a number of community partners on a downtown safety plan to address the concerns over downtown businesses and the populations, the residents that live there, on addressing the high crime that occurs downtown in Memphis and the specific areas and the concerns that they have. So that's one project. Other projects that we propose are looking at things relating to firearm violence and mass shootings, many of which actually are connected to domestic violence as well, because of the overlap between domestic violence and general violence. We also have a project that is going to hopefully receive funding by the end of March this month, which partners with the Memphis Police Department, Shelby County Sheriff, the City of Memphis as a whole, led by Mayor Strickland, as well as juvenile court and youth villages that looks to provide intensive supervision to serious juvenile offenders, because of course juvenile crime right now is a serious concern. But in that project, it is very much community focused, because youth villages provides a community based program that looks into helping juveniles and their families with identified needs as a means of avoiding future crime. So these are more directly impactful projects. Certainly there are a number of other projects that we're proposing as well. I have a proposed project with a faculty member in social work that's going to be looking at community perceptions of criminal justice, especially for most deprived populations. So whether that's women generally, women of color, male victims of domestic violence, folks who have experienced discrimination or harassment for being LGBTQ, all of those components that go into their perceptions of whether the criminal justice system can serve on their behalf. So these projects, whether they're funded or they're proposed or they're already underway, really kind of highlight the unique role the Public Safety Institute can have in linking academics and practitioners, not just to file for grants, although that's very important, because more money and more people can make any program, project, or policy better in whatever capacity that looks like. But it really is a means of kind of reinforcing the University of Memphis's overall message of driven by doing, because we all live in this community. Research is important and to be able to highlight the needs, but to be able to actually translate that into doing the work that our community needs benefits all of us, even those who aren't directly impacted, like myself. Coming here as a white, middle-class, middle-aged Jewish woman to a population that is predominantly Black, predominantly disadvantaged, means that I need to be able to use my platform to be able to benefit my fellow community members, because I do not experience the same things that they do when it comes to things like discrimination, lack of access to education, lack of access to quality housing, especially if they're living in an area that's been exposed to environmental toxins, as been recently reported by the EPA. So I'm able to use my work with the Public Safety Institute and my position as an academic to highlight these problems and also be able to provide recommendations for reform.
Great. So there are quite a few things that you mentioned, and I definitely want to get into the depths of each one, but I would like to do this, that for each of the project that you're doing, we would like to have a separate interview so we can go into the depths and the impact it has on the community and what you foresee to be the positive effects of what you're doing.
Sure.
And how. But at least for now, I want to thank you for being on the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you
I
so
appreciate
much,
the
and have a
opportunity.
great day.